Welcome everybody in our broadcast center of the Superonda talks. That's also our last lecture in that series, what we launched and we started last year in December when everybody was lucky to travel. With Arno Lederau, we had Murto, Barbara Buser, Frauke Gerstenberg, Axel Tim from Raumlabor. And today we're proud to have Taillieu Architects in that series. The series tried to tackle the question of reuse and new aesthetics and really travel to different cultures and different ways to do that. And on the last three lectures, when we went in this kind of virtual format, we tried to introduce our guests by giving a kind of portrait of them and of the practice through books. Why through books? Because we thought it's a good moment in the question when we are sitting at home to escape also in mind out of this digital looking at small screens and sharing thoughts about that. So it was like a thing for thought also from us to do this kind of characterizing. So Barbara Buser was mentioned with Maxim Gorky, African Move, and Hans Bernoulli. And the last week it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a cooking book, Concrete Island, for Raumlabor. And now it's quite difficult to do a portrait of a person who is not only an architect, who is also a colleague, to join with us also to teach young people how to get more sustainable or how to get good architects. So Taillieu, he started out of a, let's say, collaboration of an office with two other partners, now his own practice, still in relation and working together. But on his new website, he writes that knowledge of the practice from design to execution is one of the strengths of Taillieu's architects. So this he wants to do. So how we can combine this in the logic of construction, as he says, into a book. So the easiest thing was I remembered on manual books what we had, and we joined when we traveled around the world when petrol was on the price, that it was even less thinking on sustainability. But it was this kind of manuals what traveled with us to interact our machine, which guide us through the world to repair it. So these manuals, they were made like an open source book of knowledge. They explained us everything, how we could dismantle. So it was like to drive a car with an open engine on the end. So I would say if you're looking in the architecture of the Wilder Taillieu, they also a little bit like, they have this notion in the projects, this kind of manuals. So that is one book I would recommend as a kind of portrait of Joe. The second is that the practice of the office and the works which are rising up, they have a kind of, they emerge from places, situations are based on both contextual and conceptual considerations. They seem to have always been there. In fact, they constantly build on the environment with the projects. And that's why I have to offer you this kind of essay from Lessing. He wrote an essay upon the limits of printing and poetry. And there's this amazing sentence where he writes in 1766, the more we see, the more we should be able to think. The more we think, the more we should be able to see. And that's maybe also a nice way to look on the projects of Taillieu. And the second, this I had to mention on the end, also to integrate, let's say, also the younger age in education. This is a book of the Three Little Pigs. They're made of movies, they crossed over all our childhood. And this is a story of three pigs. They built three different houses, one of straw, of wood, and one of bricks. And if we talk today in the last lecture about this question of reuse or sustainability, that it's also this kind of ambiguity in the story, that it's not true on the end what is the most sustainable material on the end, because for what a material has to resist and what is the impact of a material, where we want to stay together. So this kind of complexity of the society, this will, I hope, be explained a little bit already in the lecture of Joe. So Joe, I'm happy to have you there. So the question is brick, straw. And I would say if we have to do a portrait of Joe and the architecture, maybe it could be represented by the three books to travel through. So welcome everybody. Welcome Joe. We appreciate to give you the let's say the stage. I have to stop my screen sharing and I give it to you. And for everybody who is listening, it's a nice moment also to share after this presentation a discussion. That means during the lecture still you can start to write questions in the chat and Tiago will guide us after through this discussion, which is quite amazing in the last lectures we had. They are much more open sometimes than when we are real face-to-face together.
Thank you so much, Martin, for this nice introduction. It's really a nice way to connect the things, and I really like the manual to the idea of dismantling and bringing things again together. So, and the brand was also completely okay. So if it's okay, I share the screen to start up the lecture. Some moment, yeah, and I have to do it like that, I guess. Exactly. Okay, also Cyril and Tiago, thank you so much together with Martin. I really appreciate the Superonda talks. It's a really nice idea, and look, even in this moment we could go on with the talks. So maybe even much more flexible than before. I wanted to speak about so many different things. On one hand about reuse, on the other hand about so many other things, and especially not by projects completely, but just about 3 chapters. I made 3 chapters. In that sense, I will speak about in the first chapter about some ideas, some thoughts. Second chapter, I come to some ways of approach related to projects, but aspects of a project. And I want to have the pleasure together with you to have chapter 3, what is current on the table. Pictures from the construction site. That means not always the best pictures, but just to give a kind of, let's say, view on the work we are doing at the moment, to bring it in relation with chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 1, some thoughts. Sometimes it's also about the question of node design. Sometimes as an architect you have to start with not a real intervention, but a kind of slightly change of an element. I want to bring this idea on the table, the idea gallery in Ghent, a kind of in-between hall. You come into the double door and you have 3 equal doors. Of course, the owner wants that you go into one of the gallery rooms, not immediately in one of the side things, and that's what happens. Just turning the doors, changing the hinges, so that's the normal reading of the door, where you have the look on the glass, is really the place you wanted to go through. And the closed part, who is normally the underside, was at that moment on the sides. So you have a normal way of walking through the, let's say, what is seen as a normal way of a door. And the nice thing that was the lock was exactly in the middle of the door. The carpenter made it very well, so that we only could change the hinges. And that's an intervention related because it was a gallery for objects, also used objects used in the kitchen. There was the need to still connect the rooms but keep the function as a kitchen. So there was cut out a piece of the wall to, on one hand, keep the whole room, on the other hand, make the links. It's the idea of probably there is no need to really intervene something. There is probably only the need of a changing in perception. The question of construction. a project in Pepingen, the one-to-one action on the construction site made the way we worked on this project. And this is the result of taking this beam away, because the beam was too low to have the space functioning. So what we did is in fact making a kind of prothese in steel to reinforce it after the cutting, and to even come to the pleasure how you construct the things, how you bring in the metal into the wood, and how you connect things. The question of construction too, the project Rampelken, we started with a building where after dismantling you felt that the construction was not stable enough. It was just like you could imagine it always go wrong every moment. So what we did, and of course as architects we wanted to make changes in this project. So we did one intervention, an intervention with a concrete block that you can fill with concrete, but staple also, to do everything with it, closing walls, reinforcing walls when it was needed, making even a beam when necessary. To come to that, closing things, start to make beams, to see it as one tool to intervene in all those things we wanted to reach. Even this kind of cross where there was a wall above it, to have this as a kind of result. And the only thing what we didn't plaster it afterwards was the reinforcement we did. The question of material one. We were asked in a gallery in Antwerp to make some furniture. And what is interesting in this table, we made a reflection table, a mirror table, but a mirror table with only steel polished by diamonds. And it was even more reflecting than a mirror with glass could do. But look what's happening after a few weeks standing outside. So look how it looks after a party, what happened on the table. And the nice thing about this thing is that we wanted to express that a kind of beauty is not lasting forever. It fades away. The control, you have a certain control of the fastness. If you do a lot of parties, it's going incredibly fast. If you are a very sober person, it can take long in this kind of reflection. But the quality, the beauty of a temporary beautiness. And maybe not only about that, it's also the quality of a kind of evolution in a material. Because could you really say that it's the rusty version is less qualitative than the reflecting one? The question of material two, again, the same project in Ghent, and I wanted to bring it in relation with Picasso. On one hand, is how he makes a folie of it. On the other hand, the sculpture you all know, and I wanted to bring it in that relation because sometimes it's a matter of disconnecting things. Sometimes it's a matter of losing conventions, excuse me, because why? Conventions makes that we had to make a connection between a front building and a back building. And in normal conventions, you need a roof construction, you need a wall, and you need a floor. A lot of energy just to make a connection between two buildings. What I did is in fact making a polyester tube laying between the two existing walls, disconnected from the floor, and make a connection to really connect the two buildings like that. It's on the same time translucent, it's on the same time, because it's material material qualities, it's even never there is never moisture on it on the inside because of the synthetic material. It never feels cold, and it's 1 centimeter a perfect construction because of the shape of it. And look what it is does. It was an object placed in one afternoon, a machine product between a front building and the back building, and it's 2 meters high. You just walk through to connect those two spaces with each other. What we did is, after demolishing the extension building, there came a moment that the outside, what was completely covered, was outside space and related with this space. And using a foil out of greenhouse technology, a shrinking foil in between makes a division between inside and outside. This project is quite some years old. It was the idea, imagine the gallery stops one time. Why should we invent so many things? And you know what's happened? 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, the gallery stopped as function. So this is using material. Imagine you had to do that with glass. You had to spend 10 times, maybe 15 times more budget to make a division between inside and outside for a time span of 15 years. Chapter 2, some ways of approach. A house, reading the existing, starting what you have is always the most fascinating part. If you had the luck to refurbish projects, I always feel it as a gift to have the given things in the project. It's about this house. The front, we didn't change anything. But what I disconnected all the extension buildings and just made one living space where there is still a way out from the back facade. But I don't want to speak specifically about that. I want to speak about that, what was found behind the linoleum, behind the carpet, a beautiful texture of the initial building. Just like those false marble, nowadays more expensive than the real material. But of course, there came an electrician and demolished things around the switchers. So what I did is select, instead of losing the whole nice painting of the false marble, I made a kind of zoning what reframed the nasty interventions of the electrician. To do it as a kind of technique to not to lose the qualities what were yet in the building itself. Reading the existing too, famous gray, a classified building, part of an old cloister. We're speaking about this building. The client, famous, an advertising company with 75 people working over there, asked to build in, let's say, 8 months, full project. They had to move out of Brussels towards this location. They bought the project. We also approached this building, what is the elderly housing, but I don't want to speak about that. I will speak about only this one. So what we did is, in fact, it was a cloister typology. The nice thing of this kind of simple cloister typology is that you have a corridor related with the outside space, and then on one side of the corridor always the rooms. For its specific function, it needed a relation between the corridor and the spaces behind. In this case, it was the meeting room, but also for the office spaces, we had to deal with a kind of in between individual rooms and, on the other hand, more open spaces to work. So the negotiation between the corridor and the meeting room was incredibly important. And then look what we found after dismantling this whole wall. There was even a nice old painting behind. And even after a kind of plasterboard, we could find this painting behind the wall, kept it as an element. And what could be better or much more interesting than having this element in your main meeting room? What happened by finding the colors for all the intervention? We took all the layers of the paper who were added on the walls away and found the different kind of patterns, the different kind of colors, and the different kind of colors were used to make those big sliding doors between the corridor and the spaces itself. You see the relation between the intervention which takes over the color of the given and found color in the building itself. We also framed it on a certain way to give it a kind of quotation. That's what happens on the first floor, where you have meeting rooms. The wall in between the corridor and the spaces was disconnected and replaced by those sliding walls. And sometimes the door kept for nothing, but at the moment you close the sliding door, you can still use it to have the connection between the two rooms. We had to do reinforcements also in the building by placing this beam. And the thing in those buildings is that they, for purely construction stiffness, you don't have to reinforce anything, but the flexibility, or let's say the movement of the floor, the needs nowadays are more strength, more they don't accept so many limits that you have to do reinforcement. Under this space, under the director's room, there was a really beautiful ceiling. So instead of demolishing it there with the beam, we were holding the beam under and immediately solving the beam on the upper floor. There was no budget for equipment, so we just were bringing a few T5 elements together. The upper ceiling, it was full of compartments, and we took out all the divisions, and this is the landscape office who appeared on the upper level. Keeping elements found after dismantling things to make, let's say, small cabinets in this big space, so that you can have a very specific thing, because you can still discover that the building exists out of two pieces, and one building stopped here and the other one continued there. Giving a line of under part of 2 meters as a kind of, let's say, calmness to the whole space, we could keep all the levels above that open. Reading the existing tree, again finding qualities in the existing building to do just slightly interventions, to do just changings of things to make the perception differently, rather by looking very well to the things than by instead of doing heavy interventions. Twiggy is a shop for clothes. They wanted to have the shop on different levels, on the -1 level, on the ground floor level, but also on the first floor level. The most difficult thing, of course, is to bring people on all the different levels. The ground floor level is mainly the most accessible one, and that's the most evident one. But you also wanted to bring people on a very evident and very fluent way to the cellar, what is mostly the less pleasant one, and on the other hand to the first floor, and you wanted to mix them as much as possible. Another demand or question of the owner was that people with because a lot of young mothers come to shop over there, they wanted to solve the few steps up for the ground floor level. So what was the question? Really to make a slope, the making from here a slope to the ground floor level. Take that in mind. I will explain how we solved that. The first thing was adding besides the existing stair another stair, who makes it a kind of endless looping of stairs by extruding the facade with an additional stair to bring people on a very evident and a soft way to the first floor. Taking over the existing facade, because here later on there will be placed a stair to give access to the later built apartment on top of it. And this is what happened after the moment we took out the floor to make there the slope for the little bit lower pedestrian level and the level of the shop. And at that moment I said, client, stop. I think we exactly did, by demolishing this floor, we exactly did what we wanted to obtain. So what we wanted to obtain is that the cellar, the -1, was in relation with the whole with the whole shop. And at that moment, the cellar is even the highest space in the whole building. So we just cutted the door in two, that people cannot fall down. The two chimneys stayed, and the cellar was one of the most prominent places, and they saved a lot of money by not making the slope. But they solved the idea of connecting spaces even on the best way you can do. By doing this. This is the ground floor level, here is the street level, and look what a beautiful space you reach in the cellar at that moment. Here in relation with the two levels of the stairs. The new one is behind over there, and the existing one comes down there. And this is the relation to the backside later on to connect with the apartment on top of the store. The question, what is a public space? The project Caritas in Melle. It was a competition. The location was in 1920 like that, a psychiatric clinic with different related in architecture, different kind of buildings. Spread out over a field a little bit, a few kilometers outside of Ghent. And this is one of those buildings, especially it was this building. After years, during the period, of course, the treatments of psychiatric people change. So that starts that a few buildings starts to get away. At a certain moment, they wanted to start to demolish this one. They took out the asbestos, and the asbestos saved the whole building. Because the new director asked himself if they had to go on with demolishing all the existing buildings because they wanted to make a square. Gideon Bois, who was consulting the owner, brought the idea on the table to the director to say, look, maybe instead of continuing of demolishing the building, we have to raise the question what to do with this building to different architects. So there was a mini competition. We were one of the 3 invited architects to do something with this building and to make a square, to make a public square, a square used in the totality of the whole project. What we said is, in fact, giving this project, what was very much related, you could say, to the existing project. And on the other hand, we shared the idea of a participation. So we said, yes, we give a public space to you. We made this big model to explain possibilities in the existing building. We made those drawings to explain what a different kind of places you could find in the whole setting there. To end finally with this as an end product, we made the intervention to put a few greenhouses in it. And of course, this building has a lot of limits, but also generates a lot of possibilities. A lot of possibilities in use on different kind of uses. So the greenhouses could be used in between conditions of climates. You could use this kind of theater place to do something, or some people can put a few wooden blocks to warm them in the evening. So it's a flexible building in the sense it's an open public space where you can find on different ways possibilities. Of course, we did restorations the moment we had to restore the wall like that. And of course, because they started to demolish, to get a kind of machine into it, they dismantled this piece. So we restored it with the new bricks. It brought us to the Biennale in Venice, where we get the Silver Lion with this construction, this exhibition. And the idea was, of course, this existing building was not meant to stay open. So the wood was not treated always very well. So we made an exhibition with planks, thermal treated wood that can be used in replacing some planks in the existing building because the water made some damage to the wood. It's also about living the quality of living. We made this project Kapelleveld, elderly housing. It's on a small village. You see, it's about in a hidden zone, closely related with the church, and there is a path coming like that and going through the whole building to connect all the elderly housing. And on Sunday, the people who are still can walk very well can go on Sunday to the church. To bring it in relation in its context, we started with a small scale. I don't gonna speak about the pleasure of construction, how you can solve the dripping of the water, how you can protect a beam for the absorbing the moisture. But I will speak about the quality of the scale, the scale relation of the building to its context. We brought it to a very small scale, and the corners are the result of starting from the really small scale of the room itself. That was the really starting point, to come to a totality and not from a totality to the small scale. So starting from the small scale. I just want to explain one thing. One pleasure, let's say, in this project, the one side of the location was a half meter higher than the other side. And look what it does with the building. If you see it in relation with this side, the client wants 2 years long, he wants to make it flat. But we spoke about it so many times and he agreed and he said, yes, okay, we deal with a half meter and we see it as a benefit. And that made that even this side is more on scale towards the small scale context around it. And that means that the outside space have a kind of other relation with the ground around it. But as I said, it started with this, a simple shift in the very strict square meter, almost millimeter square meter fixed program. We did one shift, a shift that a room, if you are laying here in your bed, has not only a window there, but has a corner window. The small part to be openable and the big part to have the relation. And that made it possible that you have a complete other room, that you have two orientations instead of one orientation, and that you, on the other hand, also have a very deep tablet, let's say, to put stuff on it, so that people can change the room to their personality. With the corner window, people can even look if the daughter or the son is coming over that Sunday. It changes the room slightly. And with placing the openable part, what is the smaller part, we had the freedom to have this big window in the front when you enter the room. And also in the service flats, we had an outside space related with the sleeping room behind and the living space over here. And look again what's happening here. And this kind of pleasure that people can bring it to their home to make it their really home. It's about the quality of people who are living there. It's not about the quality of the outside building on its own. Chapter 3. 3 projects to end this lecture, 3 projects to explain what is currently on the table and what is running on the construction site. A house in a public park, you could say it's a semi-public park. It's in fact the location that we found, that we have with the famous building together with the elderly housing. And this is a drawing who explains completely what we did. You will remember immediately. I spoke yet about the famous building. We did this project, and there was one very small house in the corner. The client sold it to a private partner, to a private person, and the private person wants to go living there. But of course, people can walk around there. So there is, let's say, a strange way of public-private negotiation. And this is the house. You can hardly call it a house because it's a fantastic building on its own, like the setting, but the construction itself is quite in a bad, poor condition at the moment. On the other hand, it's a nice typology of a building. But look, here in front is yet the relation with the public park who is yet over here. So the client have a few meters here, but not so much more than that. So there is not such a pleasant thing to sit here and to be immediately in the public zone. On the other hand, the underside is the south, so you will catch the light. One additional thing to explain, there is a really nice back wall on that side. So it's really also nice to have a kind of relation with that, because that's, you look here, in between the trees, you can see the wall over there. So they found a nice place in this corner there. They found a nice setting, a little bit hidden, and by the intervention of just flipping the roof construction, we made a kind of public, but not public anymore, because the public is over here, a private zone where you can still open the door to have an openness and relation, to catch here the light and to make a private zone. This is what the roof did. The walls stay all on their place. There starts to be an outside space here. And look what's happening here. South is over there. The evening sun is coming over here. And you even can jump out of your walls in this zone because you are, let's say, fenced or hidden or still founding a kind of enclosure by the existing walls over there, and using this space as an evening space, as really a space to sit outside your building, to be connected and to be related with the existing wall. There is a really small pavilion on the corner of the old walls who makes it possible that people can come from over there, coming into the building as a beside connection as the walk through the whole park. And that's the other side, the sitting space there. But this is then the active zone with cooking, eating, related with the outside space, and a small cabinet, a kind of office space, also related with the outside space. And here you have the overview to the public park. From outside, you can negotiate how much you open the relation. A model of it. Here is the turning point of the walk, the Maria sculpture in the corner to make emphasize on the turning point. But it's all about that, this kindly, simple shift of the roof who makes a complete other building. The in-between space in the later phase with more worked out details, how we made reinforcements in concrete, how we stiffen the ankle by a metal connection, and how the roof cantilevers to give also a kind of protection for the sun, for the upper levels for sleeping. The sitting place related with the wall, the stair to go up, the office space related with the outside, and how people or the kids can sleep on top of it, overlooking the wall. And this is pictures from the moment, pictures where we are currently working on it and reinforcing the walls by doing specific interventions where needed. Creating the in-between zone, and here you feel immediately yet the open space, the office was related with that, and the way we reinforce that, the connection to reinforce the corner. Looking to the other side, the relation to the openness, the kitchen will come here later, how we reinforced this view from the office space to the outside, and from the outside related with the park. We have this one where you here just see a kind of lintel above the old wall. And we do small intervention test study drawings to use a new brick to make very specific interventions. Understanding sustainability in another sense. People bought this building, were in love with the way it looked like. Later on, there was made a pitched roof on the building. We saw fantastic old pictures of the moment it was built without a pitched roof. This was the intervention. Instead of adding a layer on the outside, we built it a new building into it. We built it a new layer inside. And this is how it looks at the moment. After doing the intervention of the new building in it, to create its new spaces inside and to change the interventions, what we wanted to do with the new facade, but the facade from the inner space. To create an enfilade of spaces, 9 spaces on the ground floor, to separate it in rooms with a specific function, and to create 4 spaces on the first floor. 2 bedrooms and a guest room and a bathroom for the children, and a parent sleeping room with a bathroom over there, in between space, outside space, kitchen, and different spaces to have a kind of different zoning into the planning. The EPFL, where the things comes together, where a new roof construction is needed. A sitting space in the front, you have the entrance zone. In the back, you have a small greenhouse. First floor again, how the bathroom is make the relation with the existing. We started to dismantle a lot to keep elements what we found interesting and to come with this new layer inside. This new layer where you do a relation with your wooden structure, where you benefit of the scale of the bricks, and we used two different kind of bricks, two different measures of bricks, and how you bring things in relation with each other, and how the upper floor makes its division with the wood who is coming down, and how the light comes in the middle zone where you come up with the stairs. How the construction panel is also a beam construction element, and it's also an element to make the whole construction for the upper floor. This is the intervention in a side building to give a direction to a kind of wellness part in the building. Sketching the windows, and that currently placing the windows in relation with the existing. And at the moment currently working on how the kitchen will look like. The last project, understanding sustainability 2. Sustainability does not mean insulation. Sustainability means dealing interesting with what you get and don't spoiling with materials, and benefiting of the possibilities as much as possible. Paddenberg is this small farmstead related to a small village where they have a nature educative center. Children coming during the day together to get lessons about the fruit trees around it, to get lessons about the vegetation around it with groups. They come over there, eat at noon their sandwich, and then make a walk around it again. And this is the existing building like it is now. They needed to be done some interventions, and in fact, look on a sunny day, what is even not a sunny day, but even on a not cold day, people are sitting in the in-between space. And this was in fact the trigger to make more space than we could afford, because not all of the space has to be heated. There could be a shelter is probably sometimes for some functions more than enough. Looking from the backside, and that is what we did. In fact, making a shelter, dismantling a few objects, keeping elements like the oven to make bread, those nice elements, because at a certain moment we had a nice talk with the mayor, and he asked why are we keeping the old buildings, and I explained there are so many traces of the past who give some connections with the function that it's such a gift to use that. And on the other hand, we can give more space for the same amount of budget, because a lot of space we don't have to heat, but we can use it so many days a year. For example, the children who eat their sandwich, and this kind of elements who is for free, we get it really for free. If we look to it, if we benefit of it. The model, how we did a restoration of the old oven who was there, and the in-between space. Sorry, I did unexpectedly a kind of drawing on it. I'm so used to do it nowadays. This is the front facade. this will be insulated, the building itself. On the top we have a meeting room. Here on the top we have extra floor, non-heated, but a fantastic space to do something with. And the existing, during the past they started to build sanitary functions. They never finished, but now we continue in the same space, and some pieces has to be insulated for that. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had this one. I have to move on this one. Yeah, this is a side facade. How we took away a few of the buildings, so to concentrate us on a very well-defined space, but we didn't demolish it completely to use a little bit of those walls. Sorry, I have a little, okay, it's working again. So this is the result. The closed panels are really orientated perfectly to the south, so there will be sun panels to generate all the electricity needed in the building. And this is how it looks in its context. And it's especially about this, about the space in between. The space in between the existing part and the new layer around, and the quality of the in-between space. We made specific models. Here a model to explain the quality of the upper level of the meeting space. And here you see how buildings comes together. The existing one, so the insulated one, and the cover with only single glass. South orientated with the closed panels to generate electricity, north orientated, completely openable. Because I forget to explain, this was a competition launched by the city, and what I proposed, I did a proposal, and I said on the one condition, I really wanted to work with a technician who can really do calculations on a very interesting way, so that I really know what are the final outcome of the technologies we use. So one of the things is that we use single glass, because otherwise the overheating will take over. And so many specific interventions. The city followed the idea of the engineer, Daedalus, did together with us the whole calculation, or not together with us, but double checked our ideas with and changed things to make it really perfectly working. And looks what's happening. You found a lot of in-between space, people coming in here, and this is all leftover space, but so functional space related with a small cafeteria. Here you can walk up to have on one hand here above the few offices, you can have a meeting room, and here you have a flexible space to do exhibitions or whatever you want. Starting to communicate on a very nice 1st May with the model and to explain it to the neighborhood. Starting to take away where we had to take away things, start rebuilding and started to build up the covering, making a new roof in the roof, because parts had to be insulated, other parts not. And this is how it looks nowadays, the layer of the insulated building over there, the in-between space, and the cover all over it. And this is what I wanted to speak about, the in-between space, the covering, how we have here only windows, but because it's an oven, it does not be a heated space, because it heated itself with the action. And this is the extra space on top of the building for exhibitions or so many other functions. Or the meeting room, what is over here, looking back to the internal space, and on the other side looking over, have a view all over the neighborhood, all over the landscape around it. coming to a reinforcement of the corner, and on the other hand, keeping elements who are still there, dealing with the existing, and finally end with a relation between the existing and the new. Thank you so much. Thanks for your time to listen, and to all the people who worked on it. Thanks a lot.
Wow, thank you very much, you. Thank you very much for this amazing promenade through your practice and also through your, I would say, beliefs, because you were able, and we were, all of us, able to follow some, I think, some key operative ideas that you follow, that you work, and they seem to be very recurrent. I just take now the word to inform all the participants, all the audience. If you want, we will open now a period of questions and answers. So feel free to raise your hand. We can very quickly open your mic. And while you are preparing your questions, maybe I start with a small one. I was very interested with this question of a certain architecture of reaction, an architecture that is all the time very, very alert, very that takes very attention to what is happening. And I have the impression that somehow you are asked nowadays that you design everything, that you control everything, that you do not, there is no unexpected moments, no surprises, and your beam model needs to be perfectly tuned. And you somehow showed a practice that makes a little bit the opposite, which is very observing what is happening, that somehow, I have the impression that somehow you need to sleep in the building site to track everything. And this question of managing the unexpected, how do you tackle this pressure between the idea of architecture that controls everything, that needs to be where everything goes, that needs to put together all the technique part, and at the same time manages unexpected, and mainly, like you said, at a certain moment you're saying we told to stop. Everything was there, stop now. How do you manage this? Could you share some ideas about it?
Of course, that's an interesting point. First of all, I want to explain that you only can do that when you are really prepared. So that means this way of doing needs the same control before, just like it's not a kind of loose feeling that you can only be in a place and feel every time at the moment itself what you have to do. So you have to be prepared completely to build the things. But what is incredibly important, in my opinion, is that you have to feel the space and have to see the consequence of things who were happening. And that means that you have to be on the building site itself, that you really have to feel the space, that you even things that you are in the preparation does not felt at that moment. You have to keep the freedom at the moment you build, to keep the openness to switch to other kind of interventions would support what supports in fact the totality. But once more, you can only do that in the quick sense at the moment you are very well prepared and know all the things in the project. But it's a kind of, let's say, every time keeping possibility to switch to another thing when you feel that you can even make it better, and to keep this kind of openness in it. And you have to control the totality, but you have to keep an openness towards the exception of possibilities.
This also forces you to be kind of how do you manage this when you have your client that needs to have that vision of the certain outcome? How do you this forces you to be this kind of project attitude, forces you to be a more diplomatic, or to be a more active agent, like a PR, a public relations for architecture. This is more demanding on that managing your client.
Yeah, let's say like that. If you, for example, in the shop, there was a really rush in timing. So people buy a big building, there is a shop, there are economics. So it has to go on very fast. So we almost had no time to do a building permission. It had to be incredibly fast. And on one hand, this client, I built it 10 years before also a house for them. So they know very well how I was dealing with things. So that was one benefit. Another benefit is, of course, if you could say we save time and we save money. And it's always also an economics of means. If you can obtain the same thing that you really wanted with less tools, less interventions, you can explain things. You can explain things to good clients. You can always explain those things. And of course, it needs sometimes a mind shift. That's true, completely true. But if there is a winning element in this, you can explain those things. I'm always trustful in that things, and maybe it's a good test for yourself. If it's not sharp enough, if you don't win enough things with that, and the client does not accept, maybe you have to double check it with yourself if you really want to go 200% for it.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I passed the mic to Martin because I think he also had a client-related question. Martin?
Okay.
Yeah, Joe, you said I think it's not only a financial question, as you mentioned in the last answer, but there is this question: if someone is asking a doctor for a facelifting, how we can explain her or him that or her and his wrinkles are beautiful. So this is a question of this kind of new aesthetics. So not the financial way, but the buildings like you did them, they appear a little bit like that. You also accept that wrinkles are beautiful.
Yeah, indeed that. How can you explain that? It's like the mirror table. You have to accept that things are changing, and the question is changing or evolution of a material, is that a problem? If you have a leather seat and and it after years it has a kind of patine, you could say it's damaged. But if it's on a good way, of course, if it's done on an improper way, it's not nice. But how can you explain that? By of course you take people in a kind of story. The moment you work together with the client, you spend a lot of time together, and you build it up a relation with the client in terms of thoughts, in terms of ways to look to things. And I think that's the best way to convince people. To convince people by explaining them things, by showing them things, what you are fascinated in, how you look to things, and how you can bring them in relation with other things, and how you can find the beauty. And take care, it's not about rough buildings. I hate this kind of idea of saying unfinished buildings. I mean, they are completely finished. It's mostly a relation between refinement and, on the other hand, not to need the refinement at a certain place, but the combination of the two. And it's also keeping the control completely, because that could be a very big misunderstanding that the projects are unfinished. They are completely finished. They are finished in the sense, in the things you wanted to. It's emphasizing things and not have a need to emphasize other things. And it's this kind of balance you have to find, but it's a balance. If the balance is not correct, it's not working, in my opinion.
Thank you, Cyril.
Yeah, thank you, Tiago. And thank you, Jo, for your talk.
Pleasure.
My audio is on, yes. I just, well, we discussed about the client. I think it's maybe difficult to convince the client, but maybe there is also the other part of the construction team. And my question is, it's not the first time I see your architecture, and I must say that each time I have the feeling that it's like a fairy tale. It looks beautiful, and I believe I know your building exists, so it's a true story. But I wanted to ask you how you deal with the standardization of the construction. We know that it's not only the standardization of the industry, but also sometimes the workers. On the building site, you talk about the nasty intervention of the electrician, but you need to have the electrician with you to do this this architecture. And so my question is how you deal with the norm and the standardization, either of the industry or the worker, the company who are building, who needs maybe to make a very different intervention that they are used to do, and keep the budget of your projects. It looks like you have a magic trick.
The magic trick is very hard work. To answer to your first question, the end could be a fairy tale, but it's the result of hard working. It's the result of failing and restarting. It's the result of retaking things and looking to another perspective. And at the end, always thinks, why can I not found this earlier in the process? I will refer. I was reading once a quote of Voltaire, and he said, doubt is unpleasant, but certainty is absurd. And I mean, it's a constantly doubtful approach. It's constantly doubting about the things you are doing, to double check it constantly if it's correct, if you're doing the best you can do in this kind of condition with this kind of client in relation with this kind of context. But that's a side answer to the first part. So the fairy tale is mostly at the end of the story. If people are living there, and maybe that's for me the most important thing. It's that people say afterwards, if a client calls you a few days later and he said, I still like every day that I live in this house. That's the best thing you can get at the end. Not 20 publications, what I really appreciate always as well, that related people are open to see the quality. I really appreciate that. But finally, we are working for mostly in a lot of cases specific people, and the quality is the proof of the whole project is by them, because you can do the best architecture if it does not fit on one hand in the context with the program and with the client. It's not a good project, in my opinion, and then you failed as an architect. The second thing, to answer your question, Cyril, it's true. It's quite difficult, and you have to have the good craftsman people to go to the limit. And there is a difference in approach. With more public, bigger buildings, you can do less this refined technique than in smaller projects. But then you also have to anticipate in your design on this. And for example, Paddenberg, the last project I saw, it was a public tendering. That's a complete other typology of contractor than the private project where you work with a very specific, mostly often with people you work a lot with. For example, the one-to-one condition we saw that I showed in the very beginning of the lecture, the working with this carpenter to make the roof, that's magic. There are never problems, there are only options to choose. There are decisions to take, but there is never an impossibility in things. You always can turn things to a direction that you really wanted to do. And in that sense, it's the pleasure of, I really like to work with those people, but you can also get only this kind of result if you communicate in the location and feel also the last refinement at the moment. Another thing is that, and I think especially for example, if students are following the lecture as well, you have to understand construction, in my opinion, because construction is makes an opening towards a way you make architecture, and is not an element that you have to solve to make your concept. And that's a big difference. If you start a project with a relation, with the correlation between the mental thought you had behind it, with the way you can obtain that and the way how you can build that, if you keep those things in balance, you don't discover at the construction site things who kills your, let's say, principles. And that's again this kind of preparation, and on the other hand the understanding of making. And a brick has a completely other possibility and limits than, for example, a glass panel. They have other tolerances. If you work with that, if you know that, and you treat them on a really correct way, then you can do whatever you want with it, I think. But you have to understand the construction. And the construction has to be part of your project. And the construction is part of the project. Your material is your project.
It's you're talking, there's a very important aspect that you are underlining about trust, and you were talking about trusting and be able also to communicate to an end to a specific technician. In this case, it was a carpenter, and the one-to-one experience on the site. There is David here. He cannot ask you personally the question because it's a very noisy environment, but he asks you, how do you, now that you, of course, you also, it's a studio, and you made this beautiful gesture in the end to thank all people working with you and working on this project, even if we cannot see them here. How do you manage your team? This is a more practice related question. How do you manage this aspect that comes very much from your own sensitivity, of course, but how do you manage this with your own team to decide or to determine where a project goes and to call the shots in the end? How do you manage this with your team, and what kind of strategies do you put into place? It was, I think, more or less the question of David. Thank you, David.
David, I think it's a very interesting question because on one hand, of course, you working together with people in an office is a collaboration. It's never a kind of guiding people to let work out things that you had in mind. So that's for me a first thing. So it's benefiting of everybody's qualities to have the best outcome of it. The next thing is, of course, you could say this kind of architecture has its limits as well. You probably, I don't know, but probably I don't think you can work with 100 people like that. So it limits you probably to a group. We are now with 10 people, and that works perfectly. And that means, we worked at the Veldeving Taillieu at a certain moment with 25 until 30 people. But I think that's a limit. And it's in the pleasure of finding always the quality, and it's not about the amount of people, it's about the quality of the output. But why is it also, in my opinion, a very good question? Is because there is no Bible of guidelines to solve a thing. The moment you have a collaborator, in my opinion, the moment a collaborator thinks to solve something in a certain way because other projects were solved like that, I think you have to wake up. Because every condition is specific, every client is specific, and every building is specific. So that means, in my opinion, there are no strict rules. There is only the openness that you really have to bring all those things every time in relation, and the outcome can be completely different every time. Also in the outcome of the architecture itself. I think speaking about a style is the worst thing that you can have in architecture, because that's then you fix your tools and you say, I can solve everything with those tools. I always wanted to look for new tools.
Thank you. I will pass the word to Humberto. Humberto, I just open your mic. Welcome. Feel free. I think we are not seeing you yet, but maybe we can listen to you, Humberto.
Yes, I had a question, because in your project, there is a lot of part of the building existing that you demolished. Did you find a way or had the occasion to reuse part of that, what you demolished in your project?
We are currently working on a project. It's not in this thing, and what we will do is making a kind of wall with all the leftover material we take out of the building. It's not always possible, but in my opinion, it's more and more a question we have to raise. If you take away things, how are you dealing with this material? Because it's part of it's part of its environment. So in this new project, we now start. There are other. It will start after summer, the construction side of it, and all the material we did a calculation of how much material we will have, and we make an intervention in the landscape with making a kind of wall of the ground, what is really needed over there, in a very low tech system to use all the material. And it's in that sense a good question, but it's not always possible. But more and more I will consider all those things in the project. So.
Sure. It's also a very sustainable approach, of course, and of course it raises new problems. I'll thank you for your question, Humberto. I will pass the word to Carsten Fröhlich, artist, and he was also professor at the school at EPFL. Carsten, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Yes, we hear.
Cool. Thank you very much, Hugh, for the very nice insight in your work. And I have to say, I really like the approach, the concept of reuse by adding and interweaving an integrated structure in an existing one, as well as the concept of taking out instead of adding. And for most of the projects, it works really perfectly. And I have to say, I'm quite jealous of your work. One project I don't like too much. Maybe I'll ask you about this. Maybe I didn't understand it, but I definitely appreciate the precise interventions of reinforcing and the narrations you create, you reveal of the history of the building. And I also find them quite humorous. And I wanted to ask you what humor and absurdity play in you, in your work.
Thank you for the nice question, because I think that's an important aspect, and maybe in an indirect way. I will explain me better. For example, the connection between the two buildings with this tube. It's not about, some journalists spoke about the strangeness as a kind of important element to choose the tube as a connection. In my opinion, it was nothing to do with that. If the best thing was a square-like section, I would use a square-like section. It has to do with, and that's why I put it in the draw or the picture of Picasso's work, because it's in my opinion, it's the openness to skip conventions. And if you skip conventions, you come you come out with an at first sight probably a strange way of solving the problem, because it's not in the vocabulary of solutions. But if you keep the openness to do it like that, and keep the freedom to do it in the sense that you think it's the most interesting thing, then it gives a strange perception what could be at certain moment indeed the idea of humoristic, and it could be humoristic but it's a meaningful thing, and it's mostly laying this humoristic thing, in my opinion, is mostly laying in the fact that we don't see the perception of those things like a normal way of dealing with this thing. And there lays for me the pleasure in doing that, and not bring it in relation. Will it, of course, you as an architect, you always look to will it look nice on a certain way, but it's even keeping the openness that something can stand on its own, and yeah, that's this kind of pleasure that and the pleasure of a small intervention who is then doing so many things. And if you turn a door, you maybe for the bad visit or the visitor who is not awake enough, he don't see what's happening, but that's completely okay for me. But I'm curious, I wanted to explain a little bit more about this one project you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see that there is, this different level. You can hear me?
Yes, just to explain, if I can add something to get it more clear, or to hit the point where I wanted to talk about.
Thank you. I will. I did not understand if it was a question to customer, but I also had
a question to give the opportunity to explain something, if I could help in that sense.
It is of course this big difference between the intention and the result, and I think this is a certain quality that one remarks is, for example, when you choose to dissociate an element and to put it into a certain evidence just by using the color. Sometimes this, I think it's a collateral event, because you never talk about it. It's not present. It's not an intention by itself, but it's a very collateral event that's in a certain way participates in this new aesthetic idea that comes with the reuse. We are getting quite long, maybe for one last question, or maybe one or two last questions. I will pass the word to Rui. Rui Pinto, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, you.
Hello.
Hello, ciao, Tiago. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the lecture, you. It's always a pleasure. I just wanted to put a question because I tried to write it before because it's not maybe so clear. So I will read a question that Tiago should have read. Maybe it's easier like this. So for me, the process of the project results a lot in a kind of manipulation of the material. And in this try-error process, we could have the idea that in the end, the result is a kind of controlled aim chance, to take this surrealistic concept. Anyway, we know that this is predetermined by an intellectual will in your case. Taking surrealism, Dalí would say that the surrealistic objects always win the shape of the desire. And it's in this kind of control of the accent, and I can assume that we can find that your work is slightly in this aim or in this field. And in my opinion, this is done in your case by the means of the drawing. And I don't know if I'm correct, and I would like you to elaborate in the way drawing and specific this type of drawing that you produce. For example, I'm always reminding me these drawings that you did for the Le Ballet with these facades for the studies. And I would be interesting to know if you could elaborate more on the process that this idea of the drawing, and because it's not necessarily a representation of what is going to be there, because there's openness still for the future. That's why I kind of, in my mind, always relate to this surrealistic approach. And I would like just to hear a little bit more of how the drawing works in this process for you.
Okay, thanks for the nice question, because indeed the importance of the drawing is an enormous important element in especially in calibrating your work, in testing things, and in explaining your work. Not as a kind of presentation technique, but as a kind of understanding technique, as a kind of way to control the work you are doing. For example, a lot of details are drawn 1 to 5, but even 1 to 2, to understand really how things comes together. Mm-hmm. And it's sometimes also the pleasure of the simple simple pencil drawings to feel, to make the stress on the right things. And it's only by drawing things that you can make an evaluation of your work together with the models, because you now spoke about the drawing, but also the model is an incredibly important tool. For example, nowadays it's quite difficult with the students to come to the level of the model. So we work very much on the drawing, and then you see even more how the importance of the drawing as a language, as a communication tool. You have an alphabet, but you have to make a good text out of that. So and the drawing makes those good texts. If it's a good drawing, it's a non-verbal way of you don't have to explain things with a good drawing. But also the drawings who are not, I prefer also the drawings who explain certain elements and not necessarily every element.
Thank you.
This fits a little bit your question.
Of course, and it's really, really important, because the ones that follow, of course, your teaching at EPFL also feel that the drawing becomes not only a tool in your practice, but also exactly. A teaching and a learning tool. And I think it's really interesting. Imagine that to do a drawing, one needs to observe, and to observe one needs time. And architecture sometimes does not give you that time. So it's really interesting also to put this into perspective. I have here one question. I was trying to reach. Okay, Matthew is also a little bit blocked. I will put here Matthew that dropped this question that is related also to a cultural and historical context of where you have your headquarters, of course, in Belgium. And and I will just read it to be very, very precise with this question. According to the architecture critic Guy Backert, sorry, my accent, Belgium has a really poor history of architecture until '83 with the competition Carrefour de l'Europe and a group of young architects named Good, Young and Beautiful. And the question of Matthew is, from this analysis, could we say your architectural approach was only possible to be built in Belgium because of this lack of history, architectural history and traditions? And he also, so this is the question. And then even today, he says that we see our architecture becoming a new aesthetic copy and reproduction in many countries that not necessarily maybe have the same cultural. So question of Matthew is, does this have, your architecture was only possible in Belgium, Jo?
It's Matthew, thanks also. It's a really interesting question. It tackles a few elements. At first, I think, yes, it's completely related with Belgium. And no, it's not related with Belgium. The outcome is related with Belgium, but this kind of dealing with the context, dealing with how you look to things could be universal way. It could be a method that can be used everywhere, in my opinion, but will have a complete, or sometimes a complete other outcome if you use it in completely other countries, because the context over there is different. And then I jump immediately to the next thing, and that's a little bit again the story of the language, the Bible. There is no Bible. There is no tool box where you have to always use the same tools. There is only a mental way of dealing with the approach of a project, and not a kind of specific language what comes out. And maybe that's my that's the element. Indeed, it's a good question. Dealing with a visual outcome is for me the less interesting part of the whole work.
This is it's a very, very good answer, because I think then what becomes exported in this precise, like Matthew was underlining, is the visual and a certain aesthetic of representation.
Dangerous thing. It's an incredibly dangerous thing, because it's reduced to this kind of graphical output. But this is even not this is totally not the most important thing of it. It gives a kind of certain relation. Of course, there are always decisions to make, but in my opinion, there lays not the quality on it. It's in all those steps, and it's in all the relation with those steps that you make that you can find the quality in this work.
Yes, true. There is un petit commentaire, a small comment by Luca Ortelli, I think, which is quite interesting. And Luca Ortelli says that what he really appreciates is your statement about the pleasure of doing small projects, the pleasure of doing small projects. This somehow I take this comment just to ask you a small question. Do your operative attitude by designing finds a more fertile ground with small projects, or is the small projects allows you to have a more intimate relation with the problems? Certain, like you say, your office cannot grow very much because the way you work has a critical dimension also. And do the size of the project also plays a role with this? You feel more comfortable and more happy doing small projects?
Yeah, but look, I explained a lot of small projects today, but I not zoomed into a few bigger scale projects. Kapelleveld is quite a big scale project. The building,
yeah, I saw this one also this morning.
The building beside Famous is even a bigger project, and in that sense, for me, of course, I wanted to focus on this reuse. I wanted to focus on tackling how to deal with the existing this evening. The other side, but it's Luca, thank you. It's an interesting question because it opens the talk that in that sense that fits again the answer that I just gave. It's not about a kind of graphical language, but it's a way of dealing with the question. And even the scale, in my opinion, the scale is not important. I also really like to work on big projects. I did a lot of big projects, and I try to lay the same qualities, but in those projects, but the outcome is of course completely different. But I hope there are associations in thoughts, there are links in thoughts in the way I deal with how it deals with its context, how it deals with its way it's constructed, how it deals with the answer towards the question. And so in my opinion, the outcome is different. You also, like I explained, you have to deal with another kind of contractor. What is logic? It's a completely other scale. You have to have a complete other time schedule even to build it sometimes. But it's in that sense that it would be wrong or a misunderstanding that only small projects can benefit of this idea of thinking.
And that was my question. This is quite interesting because when scale, the impact of scale in a certain design process, and how does design process also needs. But this answer, you answered a little bit with this Bible question. Is that it's not a Bible? So in some way, one can understand, and I can understand or imagine that your design process being so open and tackling all the time unexpected, also adapt, because a big project is maybe an addition of small problems that then, and one knows that to design a house we will face several problems that are the same as designing 5 houses or 200 houses.
Exactly.
My question is quite interesting. Martin, I don't know if you want to
maybe one thing to add in that sense. For example, in the elderly house there was no fixed context, but I started with a small scale, the people who is living in there, to bring it to the totality of the building.
Yeah, but to give an outview also of the lecture series is what you said, quite interesting, that you did a selection of small scale projects because they're most related to this reuse question and this reuse aesthetics. And that is, I would say, the challenge for the new generations, maybe, because I think this reuse question is still alive in this, let's say, very contact relation between product and client, between architect and client, in this private field, let's say, now what we have. But it's far away from these big contractors and these big developers. And now that is our challenge, I would say, for the future. And this we had also in these other lectures, that we are now in this challenge situation as architects, how we can turn this small into inventions, what we every time know and what we are, let's say, trained with. Like, you know how to repair your car, but how you can repair 5 million cars, so that, and to keep them longer on the street in a certain way. And that's, I think, the challenge. And I remember there's a project of Pius, the Pope, to turn the Colosseum in a wool spinning mile. So this was in the 15th century. And can we imagine we have not this big building in Rome, everybody's visiting this as an arena of fighting, and we have there a factory of wool spinning things. So that is a very ancient thinking. But I would say in the future, and this is what maybe we try to push forward also with the series, we have to convince, we have to be better influencer out of the small projects also to this bigger scale thinking. And that is a challenge for the new generation, I would say.
Exactly. I completely agree. I mean, we have to see it as a research field to experiment with things and to learn about it, because sustainability is so much layered. and it's mostly so much unlayered used, and we can still find new grounds to work on, in my opinion. And the fact that it works for bigger buildings is there are fantastic examples. Look at Lakator and Vazal, what they did with the extension, what NL Architects did by tackling existing buildings. I think there is so much fundamental work to be done in whatever scale it is, and that's interesting. We are not at the end of that.
Great! Wow, thank you. It was a perfect finish. I want to thank you with all my heart in the name of East, in the name of also Archizoom, and also in the name of the school. Thank you for accepting this invitation. Thank you for your time. We are almost now reaching 2 hours. It's quite long. We are like also to thank all the audience. You've been amazing, not only today but also during all the other Superonda talks. It was really a pleasure to be here. Yo, thank you once again. Thank you for finishing with a very, I would say, optimistic approach. I'm not sure if I'm true on this, but it seems to me that you have a very optimistic approach. It seems also to me that your practice somehow is a witness of an architecture of addition, of layers, of never erasing, always accepting and working with and uncover, and this is very difficult today, uncover potential that is already there just by training observation, by never being tired of observing, just by open eyes. It was really, really clear, and then this transforms on each one of your projects. So it was an amazing talk. I would just, like it is the last talk of the Superonda series, I just want to underline that this is a format and a concept that we started this year, and we will this first 5 ones were dedicated to reused and new aesthetic, and they were curated by East Lab at EPFL. The next ones will start in September with a new studio, with a new lab that will also curate 5 more Superonda talks under a new topic. So stay tuned, keep also with us. I think the Zoom certainly opens new perspectives and gives us also an outreach, not only for Archizoom, but also for the school. And so thank you once again. You really very big thank you. Thank you all. And see you hopefully next time here, everywhere.
Thank you for the invitation, and thanks to the public too. It was really a pleasure to do. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you. We put all the microphone on so we can, and people can put a video so we can see. So.
Great, thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Thank you.
Share it.